My name is Alara. Since I was a little girl playing with dolls in the sun-dappled grass of my aunt's garden, I knew my destiny. It wasn't a choice, it was a fact as immutable as the turning of the seasons. I was fated to marry Cashin Thorne. The Thornes were old money, a dynasty built on finance and influence, but they were also shackled by an ancient superstition. A curse they called it. Every heir for generations had to marry a woman with a specific prosperous fate, a destiny that would channel fortune and success to her husband. Failure to do so would bring ruin to the entire family. I was that woman for Cashin. I suppose I loved him once, with the fierce, unquestioning devotion of a child who has been told a fairy story is her reality. But Cashin never saw me as anything more than an obligation, a superstitious requirement he was forced to fulfill. His heart, his soul, every bit of his passion belonged to my cousin Lena. I remember the day he told his parents he intended to marry her. The air in the Thornes' opulent drawing room was thick with tension. "Mother, father, I'm marrying Lena. I don't love Alara. I never have," he declared, his voice a mix of defiance and weary frustration. I had stood there then, my heart shattering, begging him silently to see me, to choose duty, to choose us. I had even, in a moment of desperate spite, revealed what I knew of Lena's destiny. Not one of prosperity but one of misfortune. It worked. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne were horrified. They forbade the match. A week later, Lena, heartbroken and desolate, jumped from the bridge into the churning, cold river below. The path was clear. I married Cashin. For 3 years I played the part of the dutiful wife, the bearer of the prosperous fate. I lived in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury but frozen in a marriage devoid of warmth. And then I found out I was pregnant. A tiny, fluttering hope began to bloom in my chest. Perhaps a child would change things. Perhaps he would finally see me. We were walking by the same river that had taken Lena, the wind whipping my hair. I remember telling him about the baby, my voice full of a tentative joy. His face didn't soften. It hardened into a mask of pure contempt. "Alara," he said, his voice colder than the water below. "This so-called prosperous fate of yours? It's a centuries-old nonsense. No one believes in it anymore. You used that ridiculous story to trap me. You're the reason Lena is dead." My blood ran cold. "Oh, the baby, please." He didn't even let me finish. "So now," he snarled, "you can go down there and keep her company." He pushed me hard. I screamed, my fingers scrabbling against the fine wool of his coat, clutching at his arms, begging, pleading for the life of our unborn child. His eyes were empty. He pried my fingers loose one by one without a flicker of emotion, and I fell. The icy water was a shock that stole my breath. The current, unforgiving and strong, grabbed me and pulled me under. The last thing I saw was Cashin's silhouette against the gray sky, turning and walking away. Then nothing. I awoke with a gasp, my lungs burning not with water but with clean, dry air. Sunlight streamed through my window, illuminating the familiar floral pattern of my own bedroom curtains. I sat bolt upright, my hands flying to my stomach. It was flat. No baby. No lingering chill from the river. Disoriented, I looked around. This was my room in my aunt's house, a place I hadn't lived in since I married Cashin. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The date displayed made my heart stop. It was the day. The day Cashin was to tell his parents he intended to marry Lena. It wasn't a dream. The cold terror of drowning, the betrayal in Cashin's eyes. It was all too vivid, too real. I had lived it. And somehow I had been thrown back in time to relive this moment. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. All my life I had believed in fate, in destiny. I had let it dictate my every choice. And where had it gotten me? Pushed into a river by the husband I was destined to save. Well, no more. This time I dressed slowly, methodically, choosing an outfit of quiet confidence, not the nervous, eager-to-please dress I'd worn the first time. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The desperate love I'd felt for Cashin was gone, washed away by the icy waters of the river. In its place was a chilling clarity. I arrived at the Thorne mansion. The scene was identical. Cashin standing with defiant pride. Lena beside him, her eyes wide and pleading. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, their faces a mask of conflicted horror. "I'm marrying Lena," Cashin stated, the same script playing out. "I don't love Alara. It's been so many years and you all still believe this nonsense. Family ruined? It's a story made up by gold diggers. Our business is thriving. We won't go bankrupt. I let out a soft, cold laugh that drew everyone's eyes. He hadn't even noticed the cracks already forming. The Thorne Empire was a fragile thing, and without the bolstering influence of my so-called fate, it was already starting to teeter. Uncle Thorne, I truly love Cashin. Lena wept, her performance flawless. Please let us be together. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne looked at each other, their resolve crumbling. They adored their son too much to deny him. It was Mrs. Thorne who spoke, her eyes landing on me with a calculated sweetness. Alara, dear. We have a solution. Why don't you and Lena both marry Cashin? I know we have monogamy now, but you love him too. Lena can have the marriage certificate and you can stay with him. You won't need an official title. The audacity of it took my breath away. In my first life, I had been so blinded I might have accepted this crumbs from the table offer. Now I saw it for what it was, a plan to have their cake and eat it too. They'd get the wife Cashin wanted and keep the lucky charm on the side. I stood up, smoothing my dress. All eyes were on me. I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, I said, my voice clear and steady. Since you've already chosen your daughter-in-law, I won't get in the way. The silence in the room was deafening. Cashin's head snapped toward me, his confusion evident. What did you say? I met his gaze, my own devoid of the warmth he was used to seeing there. You said you'd only ever marry Lena. I'm stepping aside. Isn't that what you want? Alara, didn't you love Cashin more than anyone? Mrs. Thorne asked, genuinely stunned. I am choosing to let him be happy, I replied, the picture of cool magnanimity. Inside I was a glacier. Cashin frowned, a crease forming between his brows. This wasn't going according to his script. He was used to me fighting for him. You don't want to marry me anymore? I'm willing to marry you and you're not satisfied? Look at you. You're an orphan. If I don't marry you, who will? The arrogance was breathtaking. I smiled, a thin, cold curve of my lips. That is no longer your concern, Mr. Thorne. And with that, I turned my back on the entire Thorne family and walked out of their lives. Behind me, I heard Mrs. Thorne hiss, Cashin, maybe just marry Alara properly and let Lena be the second wife. And Cashin's dismissive reply, don't worry about her. She's throwing a tantrum. She'll be back, begging me to marry her within the week. I stepped out into the bright sunlight and let out a single sharp laugh that held a lifetime of bitterness. Come back. I thought. Never. This time I had my own life to live. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in years. A man who had never seen me as a destiny but as a desire. A rival to Cashin in every way. The line connected. Kaylin, I said, my voice firm. It's Alara. Are you still interested in getting married? Kaylin Walker's silence on the other end of the line lasted for 3 full heartbeats. When he spoke, his voice was a low, cautious rumble, stripped of its usual playful arrogance. Alara. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. And a question I never thought I'd hear from you. Is this some kind of joke? Did Cashin put you up to this? No joke, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hand. I leaned against the sun-warmed brick wall outside the Thorne estate, the gilded cage now at my back. And Cashin has nothing to do with this. The opposite, in fact. I've just walked out on him. For good. Another pause, shorter this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp, analytical mind. Kaylin Walker was everything Cashin wasn't. Unpredictable, fiercely intelligent, and devoid of the pompous entitlement that came with old money. His family's wealth was newer, harder, built on ruthless innovation and global ventures. He and Cashin had been rivals since their school days, their mutual loathing a constant feature of elite social circles. Where are you? He asked, his tone now all business. Outside the Thorne mansion. Stay there. I'm sending a car. Black sedan. 10 minutes. The line went dead. I slid my phone into my pocket, the finality of the action sending a shiver down my spine. There was no going back now. The car arrived exactly on time. The driver, a silent, imposing figure, held the door open for me. 20 minutes later, we pulled up outside the city's marriage registration office. Kaylin was already there, leaning against a sleek sports car, looking infuriatingly handsome and utterly relaxed. He pushed off the car as I approached, his dark eyes scanning my face, looking for hints of doubt or deception. No cold feet, he asked, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. The only thing cold is my resolve, I answered, meeting his gaze squarely. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then let's go. The process was swift and impersonal. Sign here, initial there. The clerk, recognizing us both, kept her expressions carefully neutral, though her eyes were wide with curiosity. Within 15 minutes it was done. A simple piece of paper, but it felt more powerful than any family curse. It was my declaration of independence. As we walked out into the afternoon sun, Kaylin let out a low, incredulous laugh. I have to admit, Alara, I never actually imagined this day would come. I thought you were permanently enchanted by the Thorne family fairy tale. The fairy tale had a rotten ending, I said quietly. I decided to rewrite it. He glanced sideways at me, his demeanor softening slightly. What changed? I couldn't tell him the truth. He'd never believe me. I finally opened my eyes, I said, which was true enough. He accepted this. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you did. He checked his watch, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. I have a situation brewing with a shipping contract in Singapore. I need to be on a plane tonight. I'll wrap it up and be back as soon as I can. He was leaving. A part of me, the old Alara, would have panicked at being abandoned so quickly after such a monumental decision. But the new Alara simply nodded. This was not a love match. It was an alliance. We both had our own battles to fight. Go, I said. Handle your business. He looked surprised, then impressed. He'd expected clinging, questions, demands. I'll be back soon, he repeated, more gently this time. And when I am, we'll have a proper wedding. The kind you deserve. He got into his car and drove away. I stood alone on the courthouse steps, a married woman, yet utterly alone. But for the first time the solitude felt like freedom, not loneliness. I returned to my small, quiet house, the one my parents had left me, which Cashin had always sneered at. It was a sanctuary now. As night fell, I replayed the day's events, the cold anger towards Cashin warring with the nervous uncertainty about my future with Kaylin. I was jolted from my thoughts by my phone ringing. Cashin's name flashed on the screen. My blood ran cold. How did he already know? I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. His text messages lit up my screen, each one more demanding than the last. Cashin, Alara, where are you? Cashin, answer me. Cashin, I'm coming over. We need to talk. The old instinct to obey, to placate him, rose in my throat. I crushed it. I texted back, my fingers steady. It's late. I'm resting. Don't come here. His reply was immediate. I'm on my way. Be outside in 10 minutes. The command in his tone, the utter assumption of control, ignited the fury I'd been suppressing. Without hesitation I blocked his number. The silence that followed was profound. I took a deep, cleansing breath. It was over. Or so I thought. An hour later I was jerked from a fitful sleep by a furious, relentless pounding on my front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I crept to the security monitor. His face was a mask of rage, his eyes wild. He was drunk on power and panic. Alara, open this damn door. Now, he bellowed, his fist hammering against the wood. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through me. This was the man who had pushed me into a river. I didn't respond. I simply backed away from the door and called building security. There's a man harassing me at my door. I need him removed. Please call the police if necessary. I watched through the monitor as two security guards approached. Cashin turned his fury on them, his voice slurred with anger. Do you know who I am? This is my fiancé's house. One of the guards spoke calmly. Sir, the resident has asked us to escort you out. You need to leave or we will have to involve the authorities. The mention that it was my request seemed to enrage him further. For a terrifying moment I thought he might physically fight them. But finally, with a final venomous glare at my door, he allowed himself to be led away, storming off into the night. I leaned against the wall, my legs shaking. The ties that bound me to him were strong, but I had just severed another one. I had stood my ground. Exhaustion finally claimed me, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, unaware that the consequences of my choice were already hurtling toward Cashin, and that his desperation was only just beginning. The morning after Cashin's attempted invasion, I rose early, the events of the previous day feeling like a strange, vivid dream. Needing to clear my head, I changed into running gear and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The world felt new, charged with possibility. I had taken barely 10 steps from my building when a black town car screeched to a halt beside me. The doors flew open. Cashin, his face haggard and grim, emerged with 2 large bodyguards I recognized from his family's security detail. Before I could scream, a hand was clamped over my mouth and I was dragged, kicking and struggling, into the car. The door slammed shut and we sped away. "What are you doing?" I finally shrieked when the hand moved from my mouth, my voice trembling with a mixture of terror and pure rage. "Have you lost your mind, Cashin?" He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. There was no love there, no remorse. Only a cold, frantic determination. "Elara, didn't you always want to marry me?" he said, his voice flat. "We're going to the wedding venue right now." I stared at him, utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about? You married Lena. Yesterday. You got the certificate. You have what you wanted." "The one I'm marrying now is you," he stated, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Kaylin had been right. My fate was a tangible thing to them. The moment I'd registered my marriage, its influence had been ripped from the Thorns. Cashin must have faced immediate, catastrophic business losses. They weren't seeking a real marriage. They were seeking a public ritual, a ceremonial binding of my luck to their name, legality, and my own wishes be damned. "I am not marrying you," I spat, my fear now entirely replaced by white-hot anger. "I'm already married. Let me go." As I spoke, I subtly fumbled for my phone in my running armband, my thumb frantically trying to activate the emergency dial for Kaylin. Cashin's eyes, sharp even in his desperation, caught the movement. With a snarl, he ripped the phone from my grasp. Without a second's hesitation, he rolled down the window and hurled it out onto the freeway. I watched it shatter into 100 pieces against the asphalt. "After the wedding, I'll get you a new one," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I was trapped. The bodyguards pinned me between them. All I could do was watch the city blur past, my heart sinking with every mile that brought us closer to the venue. He brought me to the Grand Lyrium Hotel, the most lavish event space in the city. Inside, it was a surreal nightmare. The ballroom was decked out in obscenely expensive white lilies and silver. The air hummed with the chatter of the city's elite. Everyone who was anyone was here, sipping champagne and looking delighted. And there across the room stood Lena. She was wearing a demure lavender dress, not white, but the look of triumphant hatred she shot me could have curdled milk. Nearby, Mr. and Mrs. Thorne were playing the gracious hosts, their smiles wide and brittle. The second they saw me, they descended. "Elara, darling. You're here." Mrs. Thorne trilled, grabbing my arm in a vice-like grip. Come, come. The makeup artist is waiting. We must make you perfect." I wrenched my arm away. When did I ever agree to this? "Elara, haven't you always loved our Cashin?" Mr. Thorne said, his smile strained. "We're giving you the wedding you always wanted. What more could you ask for?" "Yesterday," I said, my voice icy, "he told me he was marrying Lena." "Not me. He has the certificate to prove it." Their smiles faltered. Mrs. Thorne recovered first. "Cashin knows he was wrong. This is his surprise for you. His apology." "A surprise." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You dragged me here by force. This is kidnapping." "Enough, Elara." Cashin's voice cut through the tension. He strode over, his expression dark. "Go get your makeup done." "I will not. I am not marrying you." His face tightened. "I'm giving you a chance. Don't make a scene." "The only scene here is the one you're creating," I shot back. I turned to leave, but the Thorne family closed ranks around me, a wall of smiling, desperate faces. "Elara, you said you'd only ever marry our Cashin," Mr. Miller pleaded. "He's been planning this for weeks," Mrs. Thorne added. "Once you're part of our family, we'll treat you like a queen." While they coaxed and pressured, I watched Cashin's eyes flicker toward Lena, his true bride. This was all a grotesque charade. "I'm already married," I stated, my voice flat and final. The chatter around us died down. The words hung in the air. Cashin grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. "What did you just say?" "I said I'm married." Wiggly. "To someone else." His face paled, then flushed with rage. "You're lying. You're just an orphan." Who else would marry you? Get dressed. Now. It was Lena who spoke next, her voice syrupy with fake concern. Just do what's right, Alara. Focus on being a good wife to Cashin from now on. The condescension broke something in me. I turned to Cashin. You want to marry me? Then let's go to the courthouse right now and get a certificate. Do you dare? His expression froze. He couldn't. He was already married to Lena. I saw the smug satisfaction on her face. My suspicion was confirmed. This was a sham. Lena is the one I love, he finally gritted out. If you truly love me, you'll accept that. I don't love you anymore, Cashin, I said, the truth of it liberating. And I don't want to marry you. This wedding today. You should be standing next to her, not me. He glared at me, his disbelief turning venomous. You keep saying you're married. Who the hell would marry you besides me? The voice that answered came from the entrance of the ballroom, bold, arrogant, and dripping with menace. Obviously, said Kalen Walker, striding into the room with a phalanx of his own men, his eyes fixed on Cashin, that would be me. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. All eyes swiveled from the forced bride to the man now dominating the entrance. Kalen Walker looked like he'd just stepped off a private jet, which he likely had. His suit impeccable, his expression a thundercloud of controlled fury. He didn't look at the guests or the flowers or the stunned thorns. His gaze was locked solely on Cashin, whose hand was still vice-like around my arm. Cashin's head whipped around. The moment he saw Kalen, his face contorted from smug arrogance into pure, unadulterated hatred. The rivalry that had simmered for years boiled over in that instant. Without a word, he turned back to me and with a violence that stole the air from my lungs, slapped me hard across the face. The crack echoed in the silent room. My head snapped to the side, a stinging heat blooming on my cheek. Tears of shock and pain sprang to my eyes. I knew you were nothing but trash, Cashin snarled, his voice trembling with rage. How dare you get involved with him? The words were still hanging in the air when Kalen moved. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He simply pointed a finger at Cashin, his voice dropping to a low, lethal command that cut through the ballroom. Teach him a lesson. It was like unleashing hounds. 4 of Kalen's men, who looked less like bodyguards and more like special forces, surged forward. They didn't throw wild punches. They moved with brutal efficiency, grabbing Cashin, pinning his arms and driving precise, punishing blows into his torso. The sound was sickening, grunts of pain, the thud of fists meeting flesh. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed and scrambled back, knocking over champagne flutes. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne shrieked, rushing forward only to be held back by Kalen's other associates. Lena stood frozen, her face a mask of horror, her triumphant moment shattered. Kalen didn't watch the violence. He was at my side in an instant, his hands cupping my face, his thumbs gently brushing my stinging cheek. His eyes, usually so full of mocking amusement, were dark with a worry that felt startlingly genuine. Alara. Look at me. Are you all right? His voice was soft, meant only for me. I nodded, unable to speak, my breath hitching. The contrast was staggering. Cashin had just hit me. Kalen's touch was careful, almost reverent. When your call connected and then there was just silence. Then the line went dead. He murmured, his jaw tight. I knew. I turned the plane around. I wasn't going to wait. He had come back for me. He'd literally turned his jet around. Behind him, his men finally released Cashin, who slumped to the floor, clutching his stomach, his nose bleeding, his fine suit ruined. The Thorne family rushed to his side, a tangle of outrage and panic. The spell of shock broke and the guests found their voices. An older man, a business associate of the Thornes, stepped forward, his face purple with indignation. Kalen Walker. We know you have feelings for Alara, but this is outrageous. How dare you crash a wedding and assault the groom? Others joined in, a chorus of privileged disapproval. This is beyond the pale. Have you no decency? You've ruined everything. They saw a rival causing a scene. They didn't see a kidnapping. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the din, clearer and stronger than I felt. Everyone, you've misunderstood. All eyes turned to me, the disheveled, unlikely center of the storm. Kalen isn't crashing a wedding. I took a deep breath. We are already married. We registered our marriage yesterday. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The accusations died on their lips, replaced by bewildered silence. They looked from me to the groaning Cashin on the floor to the furious Kaylin. "If you're married to him," a woman asked, confusion etching her face, "then why?" She gestured at the wedding decor, the prostrate groom. "Don't misunderstand the situation," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I looked directly at the Thorns. Cashin already legally married my cousin Lena yesterday. They are husband and wife. I let that sink in, watching the dawning horror on the guests' faces as the grotesque puzzle pieces fell into place. The reason Kaylin intervened is because Cashin had me abducted and dragged here by force to perform this mockery of a ceremony. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Outrage toward Kaylin curdled into revulsion toward the Thorns. The long-standing legend of my prosperous fate was well known in these circles. Whispers began to circulate, sharp and accusing. He married the cousin but wanted to publicly wed Alara for her luck? They tried to force her? How desperate can they be? Kaylin pulled me close to his side, his arm a solid protective bar around my waist. He fixed his glare on Cashin, who was being helped to his feet by his father, his eyes burning with humiliation and hate. "Cashin," Kaylin's voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "I'm taking my wife. If you ever come near her again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, what happened today will feel like a kindness. Do you understand me?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and with me tucked securely against him, he led me out of the ballroom. We didn't walk. We processed through the crowd of stunned, silent socialites, past the ruined wedding and out into the blinding sunlight. He didn't look back. And neither did I. The gilded cage door had not just been opened. It had been blown off its hinges. Kaylin's car was a silent, plush sanctuary. He didn't speak immediately, just held my hand tightly, his thumb stroking absently over my knuckles as the cityscape blurred past. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me trembling and hollow. "Where to?" he finally asked, his voice gentle. "Home. My home," I clarified. I needed the familiar neutral ground of my own house, not the intimidating opulence of his penthouse. He simply nodded and gave the driver the address. Once inside my small living room, the reality of what had happened crashed down on me. The forced car ride, the public humiliation, the slap. I sank onto my sofa, my legs giving way. Kaylin didn't hover. He went to the kitchen, found a glass, filled it with water and brought it to me. Then he sat in the armchair opposite, giving me space, just watching me with those keen, perceptive eyes. "He hit you," he stated, his voice dangerously calm. "He was desperate," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I was making excuses for him out of old habit." "There is no excuse for that," Kaylin countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Ever." He told me then what his business intelligence network had already uncovered. The reason for the Thorns' frantic, reckless move. The day before, consumed with his rush to marry Lena, Cashin had missed a critical meeting with the executives of Ethereum Industries, a cornerstone client. The executives, offended by the snub, had pulled out of a multi-million-dollar merger deal that the Thorn Empire's stability depended on. The news had hit the markets that morning. Thorn's stock was in freefall. "His parents panicked," Kaylin said, swirling the water in his glass. "They saw their world collapsing within hours of you leaving. They convinced him that a public wedding, a symbolic claiming of your fate, would staunch the bleeding. They thought they could force you back into your box. The sheer audacity, the entitlement was breathtaking. They saw me not as a person but as a lucky charm to be brandished when needed." "And Lena?" I asked, almost afraid of the answer. Kaylin's lip curled. "She got her legal certificate. I imagine she thought she'd won. Until she was asked to stand aside at her own wedding so her husband could publicly marry another woman. Even for her, that must have been a bitter pill." He stayed for a while longer, a quiet, solid presence that kept the panic at bay. Before he left, he turned to me at the door. "Pack a bag," he said. "We're leaving tomorrow." "Leaving?" "The country. My business is primarily overseas. And I think we could both use a change of scenery, far away from this drama." He gave me a look that was both a question and a statement. "We have a wedding to plan. A real one." The next day we left. For 6 months we lived in a whirlwind of new cities, new countries. Singapore, London, Dubai. Kaylin introduced me to his world, one of high-stakes deals and global strategy. It was fast-paced and intimidating, but he never sidelined me. He asked my opinion, valued my intuition. I began to work beside him, and to my own surprise I was good at it. We were a team. The business flourished, expanding faster than even Kalen had predicted. He'd look at me sometimes with a wondering smile and say, "Maybe that fate of yours isn't so mythical after all." Meanwhile, news from home trickled in through business channels and society blogs. The Thorne family was unraveling. With me gone and their reputation in tatters after the aborted wedding, no one would extend credit. Banks called in loans. The elite circle, fickle as always, closed ranks against them, seeing their desperation as a stain. And then there was Lena. With the Thorne coffers draining, she had insisted on being involved in the business, to prove her worth. She knew nothing of finance, of logistics, of management. Kalen told me she had, through a combination of ignorance and arrogance, approved a massive production order based on completely incorrect specifications. By the time they realized the error, they had warehouses full of useless, unsellable product. They had borrowed heavily to finance the production, betting everything on the deal. It was the final catastrophic blow. The Thorne empire didn't just stumble, it imploded. We were in Paris when Kalen got the final report. He read it, sighed, and handed the tablet to me. "It's over. The company was bankrupt. Assets were seized. The majestic Thorne estate, the scene of so many pivotal moments in my life, was to be auctioned off to pay creditors and the months of owed salaries to their striking employees. The ancient curse I had once believed in had fulfilled itself. Without me, the Thornes had fallen to ruin. But it wasn't magic. It was their own greed, their arrogance, and their fatal miscalculation in choosing a woman who brought them not prosperity but folly. I felt no joy, only a quiet, profound sense of closure. The ghost of my old life had finally been laid to rest. I was no longer Alara, the fated Thorne bride. I was Alara Walker, and my future was a blank page I was eager to fill, standing next to a man who saw me for myself, not my destiny. The day we returned to the city, the air felt different. It was no longer the oppressive, gilded atmosphere of the Thorne dynasty. It felt lighter, freer. Kalen and I stepped off his private jet hand in hand, not as runaway allies, but as a united front. The 6 months abroad had woven our lives together in a way I hadn't thought possible. We were partners in every sense of the word. We settled into Kalen's penthouse, a sleek, modern space that felt nothing like the old, ornate Thorne mansion. It was ours. We were building a life, a real one, based on mutual respect and ambition, not superstition and obligation. It was there, a week after our return, that the call came. I was unpacking the last of my things when my new phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. A cold prickle of intuition ran down my spine. I almost didn't answer. But some morbid sense of curiosity made me swipe accept. Alara. The voice was a broken thing, raspy and stripped of all its former arrogance. It was Cashin. A long silence stretched out, filled only by his ragged breathing. "Alara, I know I was wrong." The words sounded dragged out of him, each one a painful admission. "Please. Come back." I said nothing. I just listened, my hand tightening around the phone. "As long as you come back," he pleaded, a desperate tremor in his voice, "I promise I'll love you for the rest of my life. I'll divorce Lena. It'll be just you and me. I know you don't really love Kalen Walker. I know you. Deep down you still love me. This is just a punishment. You've made your point. Now please come home." I listened to the wreck of the man who had once held my entire future in his hands. The man who had condemned me to a river. And I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a vast, empty silence where my love for him had once been. "Nathan," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I think you've misunderstood." He fell silent, waiting for my capitulation. "Kalen and I are doing very well," I continued, a soft, genuine smile touching my lips as I glanced out the window at the skyline he could no longer afford to look down upon. "In fact," I paused, my free hand drifting to rest on my stomach, "we're expecting a child of our own." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could picture his face, the dawning horror as the finality of my words sank in. Not only was I lost to him forever, but I was carrying the heir of his greatest rival. The ultimate symbol of my new life, my new future. He started to speak again, his voice cracking, descending into incoherent pleas, promises of wealth he no longer had, offers of a love he was incapable of giving. I have to go, Cashin, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Don't call this number again. I ended the call and blocked the number, the action feeling like the final turn of a key in a long locked door. I felt a peace settle over me. It was truly over. A week later, Kalen came home from a meeting, his expression grim but satisfied. He poured himself a drink and sat beside me on the sofa. It's done, he said. Thorn Enterprises is officially dissolved. The auction was today. He told me everything. The workers, unpaid for 3 months, had finally snapped. When they realized there was no money left for their salaries, their frustration turned to fury. They had stormed what was left of the Thorn offices and later, tracked Cashin and his parents to the small, cramped rental apartment they'd been reduced to. They dragged them into the street, Kalen said, his voice neutral, reporting facts. Public humiliation. A beating. The police barely arrived in time. If they hadn't, he left the sentence hanging. We both knew what would have happened. The court had seized everything. The company assets, the properties, the art. Everything was liquidated. Kalen, with ruthless business acumen, had bought up a significant portion of it at a fraction of its worth. And Lena? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. Kalen's face darkened. She saw the ship sinking. She took what little liquid cash they had left, emergency funds, jewelry she could pawn, and she ran. Vanished. Left Cashin to face the music and the debt collectors alone. The debt collectors. Kalen explained they were not from reputable banks. The Thorns, in their final desperate days, had turned to loan sharks. These men didn't care about sob stories or fallen fortunes. They cared about repayment, delivered with interest and violence. They came to the apartment every day, their threats growing more menacing, their methods more brutal. Cashin, trapped in a nightmare of his own making, crushed by debt, humiliation, and the utter ruin of everything his name had stood for, saw no way out. He locked himself in that apartment on a rainy night, Kalen said, his voice finally softening. He reached for my hand. He burned charcoal. By the time the landlord smelled it, it was too late. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Cashin Thorn was gone. The man I had been destined for, the man who had been my entire world and then my death, had chosen a quiet, desperate end in a shabby room, surrounded by the ghosts of his own failures. The prophecy, the curse, whatever you wanted to call it, had completed its cycle with a terrible final precision. The Millers had fallen, and they had fallen completely. I felt a pang of sorrow then, not for the man he became, but for the boy I had once believed in, for the fairy tale that had turned into such a rotten, tragic story. But the feeling was fleeting, washed away by the profound gratitude for my own escape, for my second chance. Kalen squeezed my hand, pulling me from my thoughts. It's over, Ilara, he murmured, his voice a quiet promise. It's all over. And for a while I truly believed it was. The months that followed were a time of profound peace and preparation. My pregnancy progressed, and our penthouse filled with the quiet joy of anticipation. Kalen, the ruthless businessman, would come home and practice swaddling dolls with a comical intensity that made me laugh. We painted a nursery the color of a soft sunrise. The shadow of the Thorns seemed like a bad dream from another lifetime. I had embraced my new identity completely. I was Ilara Walker, wife of Kalen's soon-to-be mother, and a surprisingly adept business partner. The prosperous fate was a joke between us now, though Kalen would sometimes kiss my temple and say, "You're my luck, Ilara. Not some curse. Just you." One afternoon while I was sorting through a box of baby clothes, my phone rang. The number was blocked, but it had a official-looking area code. Assuming it was about the baby registry or a delivery, I answered. "Is this Ilara Walker?" a formal male voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Sergeant Miller with the City Police Department's Missing Persons Unit. I'm trying to locate the next of kin for Alina Grant. Our records indicate you are her cousin. Is that correct?" The name was a bucket of ice water thrown on the warm, sunny day. Lena. I hadn't thought of her in months. I'd assumed she was living off her stolen money in some anonymous corner of the world. Yes, I said, my voice careful. "We are not in contact. I haven't spoken to her in over a year." "I understand, ma'am," the sergeant said, his tone professionally neutral. "I'm sorry to be the one to inform you of this, but Ms. Grant's body was found early this morning." The world tilted slightly. I sank onto the nearest chair. "What?" She was found in an alleyway behind a known gambling den downtown. The preliminary investigation suggests suicide. A jump from the roof. She had no identification on her, but her fingerprints were in the system from a previous incident. He continued, his voice a detached monotone outlining a sordid, tragic end. Lena had taken the money she'd stolen from the Thorns and plunged headfirst into the city's underworld of high-stakes gambling. She'd lost everything quickly and spectacularly. In debt to dangerous people with nowhere left to run and no one left to use, she had chosen the most final of exits. As her only listed relative, the sergeant concluded, we were hoping you could come down to identify the body and handle the arrangements. The request hung in the air. Identify the body. Handle the arrangements. The woman who had coveted my life, who had stood by while her husband tried to force me into a wedding, who had taken my phone call for help and dismissed it in my past life. The last thread tying me to that old curse story. I looked across the room. Kaylin was in the nursery attempting to assemble a crib, muttering at the instructions. The sight filled me with a fierce, protective love. I'm sorry, I said into the phone, my voice firm now, devoid of hesitation. I have nothing to do with her anymore. I'm not responsible for her choices or her remains. You'll have to handle it through the city. There was a brief pause on the other end, a slight rustle of papers. Very well, ma'am. Thank you for your time. I ended the call. I sat there for a long moment, the ghost of my past finally, completely laid to rest. There was no one left. Cashin was gone. Lena was gone. The empire was dust. Kaylin emerged from the nursery, a screwdriver in his hand, his forehead furrowed. Everything okay? You look pale. I stood up and walked over to him, wrapping my arms around his waist, feeling the solid, real strength of him. I rested my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Everything's perfect, I whispered, meaning it with every fiber of my being. I looked past him into the sunlit nursery at the crib he was building for our child. This was my life now. This was my fate. Not one written by an ancient curse, but one I was building myself, day by day, filled with love, peace, and a promise I intended to keep. The legend had been right all along. The Thorns had fallen, doomed to ruin. But it wasn't because they failed to secure a magical woman. It was because they failed to see the woman right in front of them. They valued a superstition over a person, and in the end, that was the only curse that ever truly mattered. My story, the real one, was just beginning. The end.